The summer of 1994 in Boston was the kind of hot that made the air feel thick, like you were walking through soup. The city hummed with the sound of traffic, distant sirens, and if you listened closely, music. It spilled out of open apartment windows and the doorways of clubs, a constant soundtrack. For a young woman, just 21, the heat was the least of her worries. Her world was a tight loop of practice rooms, part-time job shifts, and the small, cramped stage at Wally's Cafe, a legendary spot where music students went to learn the real language of jazz. She was a trumpet player. Her life was measured in scales, in the burn of her lip muscles after hours of practice, in the quiet hope that she was getting better. She was good, she knew that. The teachers at the prestigious music school she attended told her so. But good in a classroom was one thing. Good in the smoky, unforgiving light of a real jazz club, where the audience talked over you if you didn't grab them, was something else entirely. That kind of good felt like a distant mountain peak, shrouded in cloud. Her trumpet was her most constant companion. Its case was scuffed from being hauled on buses and subways. The brass, no matter how much she polished it, carried the faint, permanent fingerprints of her anxiety and her dreams. She practiced until the notes felt etched into her bones, until the melodies of the greats Miles, Dizzy, Clifford Brown played in her head even in her sleep. But copying was one thing. Finding her own voice, the thing that would make someone stop and really listen, that was the mystery. Wally's on that particular night was packed. The air conditioner fought a losing battle against the body heat of the crowd. The smell was a familiar mix of stale beer, old wood, and the metallic tang of nervous excitement. She was there to listen, to study, to disappear into the dark corners and just absorb. A visiting band was on stage, a group of older, seasoned musicians who played with a relaxed power that only came from decades on the road. They were telling stories with their instruments, laughing with each other through complicated musical phrases. Sitting on the rickety stool at the end of the bar, she watched their trumpet player. He was good, solid, weaving in and out of the chords with confidence. A thought, dangerous and compelling, began to form in the back of her mind. It was the same thought that visited every time she came here. Could I, should I? The tradition at Wally's was that if you were brave enough, you could ask to sit in for a tune. It was a rite of passage, and it could be brutal. You could soar, or you could fall flat on your face in front of everyone. Her heart started a dull, heavy thump against her ribs. Her palms felt damp. No, she told herself. Not tonight. They're too good. I'm not ready. But another part of her, a quieter, more stubborn part, argued back. You'll never be ready if you don't jump. This is why you came here. This is the whole point. The battle raged inside her through the band's next two songs. She barely heard the music. Then, during a break, as the musicians stepped off the stage to get a drink, she moved without letting herself think anymore. She found the bandleader, a saxophonist with a kind face. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Excuse me," she said. Would it be possible for me to sit in on a tune? On trumpet?" He looked her over, saw the nervous hope in her eyes, the instrument case clutched like a shield. He smiled. "Sure, kid. Next set, we'll call you up. Something simple. A blues in B-flat." The wait was torture. The 30 minutes until the band returned felt like 3 hours. Every possible disaster played out in her mind. She'd forget the chord changes. Her lip would give out. She'd play a note so painfully wrong the audience would cringe. She ran her fingers over the smooth valves of her horn for comfort. When the bandleader finally waved her up, the walk to the stage felt like crossing a wide, empty plain. The lights were brighter up there, hotter. She gave a quick, nervous nod to the other musicians, who offered small, polite smiles. She put the mouthpiece to her lips, the familiar cool metal a tiny anchor. The bandleader counted off, and they launched into a mid-tempo blues. For the first few measures, she just listened, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm of the bass and drums. Then it was her turn. She took a breath that felt too shallow and started to play. The first notes were careful, a bit tight, sticking close to the basic melody. But as she moved into her solo, something began to loosen. The hours in the practice room paid off. Her fingers found the valves without her having to think about it. She started to experiment, adding a faster run here, a bluesy bend there. She wasn't just playing notes anymore. She was starting to try to say something. The fear was still there, buzzing in the background, but it was joined now by a flicker of something else, a thread of joy. She finished her solo to a warm ripple of applause from the audience. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. A flush of relief and pride warmed her cheeks as she stepped back, letting the pianist take his turn. She had done it. She hadn't conquered the mountain, but she had taken a solid step up the slope. What she did not see, did not notice at all in her focused state, was the man sitting at the far end of the bar. He had come in quietly after her set began. He was an older black man, with a wise, weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a hat and a comfortable suit, and he held a drink he wasn't really drinking. He was listening, really listening. A slight, knowing smile played on his lips as he heard her find her footing during her solo. He was a giant in this world, a musician whose sound had shaped the very history of the music she was trying to learn. He had played for presidents and kings, with the greatest bandleaders who ever lived. His name was Clark Terry. He was known not just for his incredible, joyful trumpet and flugelhorn playing, but for his boundless generosity to young musicians. He loved nothing more than to encourage, to teach, to pass the torch. As the tune ended and she thanked the band, ready to melt back into the safety of the crowd, he moved. He stood up and began making his way through the packed room. A few people recognized him, their eyes widening, whispers following his path like a wake behind a ship. He walked right up to her as she was packing her horn away, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. He looked down at her, his smile widening into a magnificent, gap-toothed grin that seemed to light up the whole dim corner of the club. His voice, when he spoke, was a warm, gravelly rumble, a voice used to telling stories. "Young lady," he said, and the way he said it commanded her entire attention. "You've got some chops on you. You really do." Her mind went blank. She recognized him instantly. It was like having a statue in a history book suddenly step down and speak to you. All she could manage was a stunned, "Thank you, sir." He leaned in a little, his eyes twinkling with pure mischief. "I've got an idea," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, yet still carrying in the suddenly quiet space around them. People were straining to hear. "How about you and I have a little duel tomorrow? Right here. Just you, me, and the rhythm section. Let's see what you're really made of." The air vanished from her lungs. The noise of the club seemed to fade into a distant roar. A duel with him. It was an honor so immense it felt like a threat. It was the kind of challenge that could make a career or break a spirit. She stared at him, searching his face for a sign that he was joking. But the challenge in his eyes was real. It was an invitation to step into a ring she never imagined entering. The crowd around them had fallen completely silent, waiting for her response. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. This was the crossroads, arriving not with a warning, but with a grin and a gauntlet thrown down. She swallowed hard, the sound loud in her own ears. Every instinct screamed to politely decline, to run, to hide. But somewhere, deeper than the fear, a spark caught. This was her idol, and he was asking her to play. She took a shaky breath and met his gaze. "Okay," she said, the word feeling both terrifying and electrifying as it left her mouth. "I'll be here." His grin became a beacon. "That's what I like to hear," he boomed, clapping a heavy, friendly hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow night. Don't be late." He turned and ambled back to his seat, leaving her standing there, the center of a stunned circle of whispers. The trumpet case in her hand felt 10 times heavier. The step she had taken onto the stage minutes before now felt like a tiny shuffle, compared to the leap she had just agreed to. The duel was set. The teacher had issued his challenge, and for the young trumpet player, the long, anxious countdown had just begun. Everything in her life, up until this very second, now felt like mere preparation for what was to come tomorrow. The walk home from Wally's was a blur. The night air, which should have felt cool, was just more of the same thick heat, but she didn't feel it. Her mind was a roaring tunnel, replaying the last 5 minutes on a loop. The famous grin, the gravelly voice, the word duel hanging in the smoky air. She carried her trumpet case like it was made of solid lead, her fingers clamped white around the handle, back in her small, cluttered apartment. The reality crashed down. She dropped the case on her bed with a thud and just stared at it. A duel with him. It wasn't a dream. It was a promise. And it felt like a trap door had opened beneath her feet. The first wave was pure, cold panic. What had she done? Who did she think she was? He was a master, a legend who had invented sounds, who played with a lifetime of stories in every note. She was a student. A good one, maybe, but a student. Her job was to listen to his records, to transcribe his solos, to try and understand a fraction of his genius. Her job was not to stand on a stage and try to exchange musical blows with him. The idea was ridiculous. It was arrogant. She would be humiliated. She pictured the scene, the club, even more packed than tonight. Everyone there to see the great man put a little upstart in her place. She would play a few weak, shaky notes. He would respond with a flurry of effortless, breathtaking music that would highlight every single thing she lacked. The crowd would maybe feel sorry for her at first, then just get bored. She'd have to walk off the stage, past all those pitying stares, and probably never pick up her horn again. Her career, before it even started, would be over, ended by her own foolish agreement. For a long time, she just sat on the edge of her bed, paralyzed. The silence of the apartment was oppressive. Normally, she'd fill it with music from a record player or with her own practice. Now, the thought of playing a single note made her feel sick. Eventually, a different kind of fear kicked in. This wasn't just about embarrassment anymore. This was about respect. He had asked her. He had heard something and he had asked. To not show up, or to show up and play scared, would be an insult to him. It would be like throwing his challenge back in his face. He was testing her, yes, but he was also offering her something incredibly rare, his attention. That thought sparked a tiny, fragile flame of determination. It was smothered almost immediately by another wave of anxiety. But it didn't go all the way out. She knew she wouldn't sleep. So she did the only thing that felt familiar. She opened the case. The trumpet lay there in its worn blue velvet, gleaming dully under the cheap overhead light. She didn't take it out. She just looked at it. This was the instrument that had gotten her into this. This was her voice. Slowly, almost against her will, she started to think like a musician. Not like a scared kid, but like a problem solver. Okay, a duel. What did that mean? Would they trade solos back and forth? Would they play a tune together? What tune? A blues, probably. It was always a blues. Her mind, which had been spinning in chaos, began to latch onto technical details. It was a refuge. Chord changes, tempos, keys. She stood up abruptly and went to her small desk, piled high with sheet music and cassette tapes. She pulled out a stack of his records. She put one on her small player, dropping the needle carefully. His sound filled the room, that huge, warm, conversational tone. Notes that seemed to bounce and laugh. She listened, not for pleasure this time, but for clues. How did he build a solo? How did he pace himself? What were his favorite little phrases, his signature moves? She listened until her ears felt tired. Then, she finally picked up her own horn. She put the mouthpiece to her lips. It felt strange, foreign. She played a long, soft note, just to feel the vibration. Then a scale. It sounded thin and nervous to her ears. She tried to play one of his famous lines, but it came out stiff, a cheap copy. Frustration boiled over. She put the horn down. This was useless. She couldn't out-Clark Terry. That wasn't the point. She knew it wasn't the point. But what was the point? The hours ticked by. She moved through cycles, frantic practice, then despair, then more listening, then a few minutes of exhausted, restless lying on her bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. Her lip began to feel sore and swollen from overplaying. She made a cup of tea and let it go cold on the windowsill. She thought about calling someone, a teacher, a friend from school, to ask for advice. But she didn't. This was hers to figure out. Talking about it might make it too real. Or someone might say something sensible, like telling her to back out. And a part of her didn't want to hear that. Daylight came, gray and unwelcome, seeping through her thin curtains. The day of the duel. It stretched ahead of her, an endless desert she had to cross to get to the cliff she was going to jump off at nightfall. She tried to go about a normal day. She went to her part-time job at a copy shop near the university. The routine tasks, making copies, collating papers, dealing with customers, were a weird relief. For minutes at a time, she would forget. Then it would surge back, a jolt of electricity to her heart. Tonight, people at work asked her what was wrong. You look tired, they said. She just smiled weakly and said she hadn't slept well. How could she explain? Just a musical showdown with a living legend tonight. No big deal. After work, she went to the school. The practice rooms were buzzing as usual. The sound of 100 different instruments bleeding through the walls. It was normally a sound that energized her. Today, it just felt like noise. She found an empty room and closed the door. The silence inside was heavy. She took out her horn again. This time, she didn't try to play like him. She just played like herself. Or, She tried to remember what playing like herself felt like, before the challenge had turned her into a bundle of nerves. She played simple melodies, songs she loved. She tried to focus on making a beautiful sound, just one note at a time. For a few minutes, it almost worked. She almost found that thread of joy from the night before. Then the thought would intrude, in 6 hours, you'll be doing this in front of him. And the feeling would vanish. The afternoon dragged on. She ate something without tasting it. She cleaned her trumpet meticulously, polishing every inch, aligning the valves. A ritual to calm her hands. As she put it back in the case, her eye caught a small, faded sticker on the inside of the lid. It was from a summer music camp years ago. She remembered being 13, so excited about this horn, about all the possibilities. That girl hadn't been afraid of giants. She dreamed of meeting them. That was the thought she held onto as she began to get ready that evening. She wasn't that fearless kid anymore, but maybe she could borrow a little of that old courage. Putting on her clothes felt like putting on armor. Simple, comfortable clothes she could move in. She looked at herself in the small mirror. She looked pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but her jaw was set. She picked up the case. It felt different now, not lighter, but purposeful. It was no longer just an instrument. It was her ticket into the arena. She was terrified. The fear was a live animal in her chest, but beneath it, that tiny flame was still burning. It wasn't confidence exactly. It was more like stubbornness, a refusal to completely disappear. She left her apartment and walked toward the club. The city lights were coming on. The sounds of the evening felt amplified. Every car horn, every laugh from a passing group of friends seemed sharp and clear. As she turned the corner and saw the familiar glow of Wally's sign, her steps slowed. There was already a crowd outside, bigger than usual. Word had gotten out. They weren't just here for the music tonight. They were here for the show, for the spectacle, for the duel. She stopped for a moment, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it, the point of no return. She could still walk away. She could turn around, go home, and pretend it was all a strange dream. She thought of his grin. The challenge in his eyes hadn't been mean. It had been bright, alive. It was an invitation to play. A real, serious, terrifying game. Taking a deep, shaky breath that did nothing to calm her, she tightened her grip on the handle of her case. She straightened her shoulders, and she walked forward, pushing through the crowd at the door, moving into the noise and the heat and the light, toward the most important night of her musical life. The inside of Wally's was a wall of sound and heat. It felt different from any other night. There was a charge in the air, a buzzing expectation. Every stool, every inch of standing room, was packed. People were craning their necks, talking excitedly. She felt their eyes land on her as she squeezed through the crowd, the trumpet case held tight against her chest like a shield. She made her way to the very edge of the stage area, a small space that felt like a little island of calm before a storm. The house band was already up there, setting up, chatting quietly. They gave her quick, sympathetic nods. They knew what was about to happen. And then she saw him. He was on the other side of the small stage, laughing with the bass player. He looked completely at ease, like he was about to have a picnic, not a musical showdown. He wore a crisp, colorful shirt and his famous hat was tilted back on his head. He caught her eye and his whole face lit up with that monumental grin. He gave her a big, welcoming wave, as if to say, "Good, you're here. This is going to be fun." His ease made her own nerves feel even louder. Her mouth was dry. Her hands were cold. She could feel her heart thumping a wild, irregular rhythm. The club owner, a man who had seen 1,000 musicians come and go, sidled up to her. "Deep breaths, kid," he muttered out of the corner of his mouth. "Just play the music. Forget he's a legend. He's just another horn player tonight. Just another horn player." It was a nice thought, an impossible one. The bandleader stepped to the microphone. The crowd noise dropped to a low hum. "All right, folks," he said, a smile in his voice. "We've got a real special treat for you tonight. You all know the man, the myth, the legend." A huge cheer erupted for the older musician, who took a small, funny bow. "And we've got a very brave young talent with us, who was crazy enough to accept a little challenge." There was a warmer, but still tense, smattering of applause for her. She felt her face grow hot, and so, the bandleader continued, without further ado, "Let's just call it a friendly conversation, a blues in F nice and easy, a blues in F a simple, foundational tune every jazz musician knows in their sleep." That was the battlefield, The drummer clicked off a slow, steady tempo, not a sprint, but a confident walk. The pianist laid down a soft carpet of chords. The bassist thumped a deep, reassuring heartbeat. The older musician gestured to her with his horn. "Ladies first," he said, his voice a warm rumble over the music. The moment had arrived. There was no more time to think. She lifted her trumpet. The mouthpiece found her lips, which felt numb and unfamiliar. She took a breath, listening to the pattern of the chords cycling past. 1, 2, 3, 4, and she jumped in. Her first few notes were careful, almost timid. She stuck close to the melody, playing it safe. Her sound was thin, tight with fear. She could hear it. She knew everyone could hear it. Inside, she was screaming at herself. Asterisk play, just play. Asterisk, but her body wouldn't listen. It was locked up. She finished a short, unremarkable chorus and lowered her horn, her stomach sinking. This was the humiliation she had feared. It was happening. He didn't wait a beat. He raised his own horn, that big, beautiful flugelhorn with its mellower, rounder sound. And then he played. It wasn't a flashy run. It wasn't a blast of technical genius to show her up. He played a single, long, gorgeous note. It was warm as honey, strong and clear and full of stories. He held it, let it bloom in the air, and then he bent it just a little, giving it a friendly, questioning curl at the end. It sounded like a raised eyebrow. It sounded like, "Is that all you've got?" Then he began to play simple phrases, but each one was a perfect little sentence. He would play a short, catchy idea asterisk asterisk and then leave a space. It wasn't a solo. It was a conversation starter. He was talking to her, and he was waiting for an answer. He nodded at her again, his eyes encouraging behind the bell of his horn. Something shifted. The fear was still there, but now it had to share space with something else, the need to answer. She raised her trumpet again. This time, she didn't think about the crowd, or about winning, or about being good enough. She just listened to the last phrase he had played, and she tried to talk back. She played a short response. It was still simple, but it was stronger. It was directly connected to what he had just said. It fit. A huge, booming "yeah" exploded from him. It wasn't mockery. It was pure, joyful encouragement. It was like a fuel injection to her confidence. The band seemed to sit up a little straighter, digging into the groove. Now it was his turn again. He took her little phrase and played with it. He repeated it, twisted it upside down, made it swing. Then he ended on a playful, sliding note that pointed right back at her like a musical finger. This time, she didn't hesitate. She came in right on time. She borrowed a bit of his playful slide, added a faster run of her own that she'd practiced a million times. It wasn't perfect, but it had energy. It had a bit of her voice in it. "Tell it," he shouted, laughing. And so it went, back and forth. They traded not just solos, but ideas. He was the teacher, and the bandstand was his classroom. He would throw out a concept, a rhythmic idea, a bluesy bend, a space of silence, and then watch to see what she would do with it. When she stumbled, he would play something so strong and solid it would pull her back onto the track. When she did something interesting, he would shine a spotlight on it by repeating it or cheering her on. She stopped thinking completely. She started listening, and then reacting. The fear melted away, burned off by the heat of the music. She was inside the song now, inside the conversation. She forgot about the hundreds of people watching. All that existed was the cycle of chords, the steady pulse of the rhythm section, and the joyful, challenging sound of the master across from her. She started to take risks. She held a note longer than she meant to. She tried a complicated jump between notes and, miraculously, landed it. She played a phrase that was soft and sad, and saw him nod slowly, approvingly. He, in turn, began to play more complex, dazzling lines, but they never felt like attacks. They felt like invitations. Asterisk, look what you can do with this language. Asterisk, he seemed to be saying. Asterisk, look how much fun it is. Asterisk, his playing was full of humor and warmth and an immense, generous spirit. They went on like this for chorus after chorus. The crowd was no longer a silent, judging jury. They were part of it now, clapping along, shouting their appreciation. The energy in the room was electric, but it was positive, uplifting. Finally, after what felt like both an instant and a lifetime, he gave a signal to the band. He began to play the simple, recognizable melody of the blues tune, calling them all back home. She joined him, playing the melody in unison, her sound stronger and clearer now, woven together with his. The band played one last, solid ending chord, and then there was silence, for just a split second, before the room erupted. The noise was deafening. Cheers, whistles, thunderous applause. The sound of people stamping their feet on the old wooden floor. It was a wave of pure sound that washed over the stage. The older musician immediately stepped over to her. He was beaming. He didn't say a word. He just wrapped her in a huge, bear-like hug, his horn pressing between them. He patted her back firmly. When he pulled back, he held her by the shoulders, looking her right in the eyes. His own eyes were shiny. "You see?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You see? You told your story. You did it." She couldn't speak. She was dizzy, breathless, swimming in the adrenaline and the roar of the crowd. All she could do was nod, a shaky, disbelieving smile breaking across her face. The weight of the last 24 hours, the terror, the anticipation, it was all gone. In its place was a feeling of lightness, of connection, of having passed through a fire and come out the other side. Not burned, but forged. He turned her to face the audience, putting a firm hand on her back, presenting her. The applause swelled again for her alone. She gave a small, awkward bow, her mind still reeling. The duel was over. There had been no winner, no loser. There had been a conversation, and in that conversation, everything had changed. The applause didn't really stop. It softened, turned into the general buzz of the club. But to her ears, it was like a permanent new sound in the air. She stood there on the side of the stage, her trumpet dangling from her hand, feeling completely untethered from her own body. It was as if she'd been running at a full sprint for a day and a half, and someone had suddenly cut the finish line tape. She didn't know what to do with herself. The older musician was surrounded instantly, well-wishers, old friends, other musicians wanting to shake his hand. He was in his element, laughing, telling a story, his arm occasionally sweeping out to gesture toward her. She caught snippets. "Did you hear that, young lady? And now that's what I'm talking about." She slowly, carefully, put her trumpet back in its case. The movements were automatic, clicked the latches, her hands were steady. That was the first thing she noticed. They weren't shaking anymore. A deep, solid calm had settled in the center of her chest, where the frantic bird of fear had been flapping its wings just an hour before. People started coming up to her, faces she recognized from school. Their expressions completely different now. They weren't looking at her with pity or curiosity. They looked at her with respect, with a kind of awe. A classmate, a saxophone player known for being a tough critic, clapped her on the shoulder. "Man," he said, shaking his head, "you held your own. You really did." The words were simple, but from him, they felt like a medal. She smiled, said thanks, but her voice sounded far away to her. She was replaying the duel in her head, but not the notes. The feeling, the moment when his shout of "yeah" had snapped her out of her fear. The way the music had stopped being a test and became a playground. She had spoken, and a giant had listened and answered. That was the thing she couldn't get over. He had listened to her. The crowd eventually began to thin. The house band started their regular set, and the night slowly returned to normal. Well, a new kind of normal. She found herself at the bar, a glass of water in front of her that she didn't remember ordering. She was just watching the condensation roll down the side of the glass. He found her there. He slid onto the stool next to her, letting out a theatrical sigh of relief. "Whew, that's what I call blowing the pipes out." He flagged down the bartender for a fresh drink, something non-alcoholic. He took a long sip and then turned to her, his expression softening from performer's glee to something more serious, more grandfatherly. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked, his voice low. She looked at him. "Feel what?" "The shift," he said, moving his hand in a wavy line through the air. "The ground under your feet. It's different now." She nodded slowly. That was exactly it. The ground was different. The mountain peak she'd been staring at hadn't gotten smaller, but the path to it looked clearer. More than that, she realized she was already on the path. She wasn't just staring from the bottom anymore. "You weren't trying to beat me," she said, the realization forming fully as she said it out loud. "You were trying to pull me up." His grin returned, but it was a quieter, more satisfied one. "Child, what would be the point of beating you? Any fool with 40 years more experience can do that. That's not music, that's ego." He tapped his chest. "Music isn't here. It's a conversation. I heard you last night, trying to talk. I just wanted to give you a proper place to speak up. See what you really had to say." He took another sip. "And you know what? You got a lot to say. You just needed to forget about who I was, and who you thought you weren't, and just say it." They sat in comfortable silence for a minute, listening to the band. Then he spoke again, his tone practical now, So, what's next? The question would have paralyzed her yesterday. Now, it just felt like the next logical step. I keep playing, she said. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a hope or a dream. It felt like a fact, a plan. You do. He agreed. You practice not just your scales, but your listening. You play with as many people as you can. You steal ideas from everyone, he winked. And you twist them up until they sound like you. And when you get scared again, and you will, everybody does, you remember tonight. You remember that the only thing the music wants from you is your honest voice. He finished his drink and stood up, groaning as he straightened his back. I'm an old man. I need my beauty sleep. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, slightly crumpled business card. It just had his name and a phone number. He pressed it into her hand, closing her fingers around it. You ever need a word of advice or a kick in the rear, you call that number. You hear me? She looked down at the card, then back up at him, her eyes suddenly stinging. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. Good, he said. He pulled her into one more quick, tight hug. Keep telling your story. It's a good one. And then he was gone, weaving his way through the crowd toward the door, shaking a few more hands on his way out. She watched him leave, the card a small, powerful talisman in her palm. The walk home that night was the complete opposite of the night before. The air felt light, cool. The city sounds were a friendly soundtrack. She carried her trumpet case, and it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a part of her arm. In the days and weeks that followed, the change became more obvious. At school, teachers seemed to treat her with a new level of seriousness. They pushed her harder, but differently. It was no longer try to get this right, but explore this idea. Her classmates wanted to form groups with her. They'd say, let's try that trading force thing you did with him. But the biggest change was inside her own head, the critical voice. The one that always whispered, you're not good enough, you're faking it. Someone's going to find you out, That voice hadn't disappeared, but it had lost its power. It had been drowned out by the memory of a real, live, honest musical conversation with one of the greats. When that voice started up now, she had an answer for it. He listened to you. He heard you. She practiced with a new purpose. It wasn't just about technique anymore. It was about discovery. What did she want to sound like? What stories did she want to tell with her horn? She listened to records not to copy, but to have a one-sided conversation with the masters, answering their phrases in her mind. A few months later, she was offered a gig with a professional band that was going on a small tour. It was her first real, paying musician job. The leader of the band was a friend of a friend, and he'd heard about the duel. Anyone who can hold a bandstand with that man, he said, can handle a 2-week tour with us. The night before she left, she took out the business card. It was a little more worn now, from her looking at it. She thought about calling, just to tell him thank you, to tell him about the tour. But she didn't. She knew what he would say. He'd say, that's wonderful, now go do the work. She put the card back in her trumpet case, right next to that old summer camp sticker. They were bookends now, the beginning of the dream, and the moment the dream became real work. She went on the tour. It was hard, long drives, bad food, strange hotels, but the music was real. And every night, when it was her turn to solo, she would have a fleeting moment of that old fear. Then she'd take a breath, listen to the band churning behind her, and she'd hear a ghost of a gravelly voice in her ear. Tell your story. And she would step forward, raise her horn, and begin to speak. Time has a funny way of folding. Years can feel like a long, straight road when you're living them. But when you look back, the important moments are all stacked up close together. For the young trumpet player, now not so young anymore, the memory of that one hot night in Boston never faded. It didn't become a dusty old story. Instead, it lived inside her, a quiet, steady pulse that kept time with her own heartbeat. The path wasn't always smooth. The tour led to other gigs, some great, some lousy. There were nights in glamorous clubs in big cities, and nights in half-empty dives where the only audience was the bartender. There were recordings that made her proud, and solos she wished she could do over. She moved from city to city, the contents of her life whittled down to what could fit in a suitcase and her ever-present trumpet case. Through it all, the lesson of the duel was her compass. It was about the conversation, not the conquest. She found herself drawn to other young musicians, the way he had been drawn to her. She saw the same flicker of hope and terror in their eyes when they stepped onto a bandstand. When she led her own groups, she made a point of really listening to them, of shouting an encouraging yeah, When they took a risk, she wasn't copying the old master. She was speaking the language he had taught her, a language of generosity. One afternoon, she found herself in a bright, sunlit classroom, not a dark club. She was a guest clinician at a university, a role she'd once found intimidating. A room full of sharp, talented students stared back at her, their instruments on their laps. One kid, a trumpet player with fierce concentration and nervous fingers, reminded her so much of herself it was almost painful. They played a tune as a group. The kid was technically brilliant, his fingers flying, playing all the right notes in all the right places. But it was like watching a brilliant machine. There was no joy in it, no fear, no story, just execution. After the tune, she asked him to stay behind for a minute. The room emptied, leaving just the two of them in the quiet. "You're a phenomenal player," she said, and meant it. "Your chops are way ahead of where mine were at your age." The kid nodded, a little stiffly. "Thank you. But I have a question," she continued, leaning against a desk. "When you play that fast run in the second chorus, what are you trying to say with it?" He blinked. He looked at his horn, then back at her. "Say it's the changes. It's an arpeggio. It fits perfectly," she agreed. "But music isn't a puzzle where everything just has to fit. It's a language. Those notes are your words." She picked up her own trumpet, which was never far away. She didn't play anything fancy. She played a simple, bluesy sigh, just 3 notes that drooped and then rose again, full of a tired, happy feeling. "That says something, right?" He nodded, his expression opening up just a crack. "That's all I'm talking about," she said. "The notes on the page, the scales, the technique, that's just your vocabulary. The duel isn't about who has the bigger vocabulary. It's about who can tell the better story." The kid's eyes widened. "Duel?" And so, sitting there in the sunlight, she told him the story, not as a boast, but as a lesson. She told him about the heat, the fear, the crushing weight of the challenge. She described the sound of that first, single, questioning note from the flugelhorn. She imitated the booming "yeah" that had pulled her from the cliff's edge. She talked about the back and forth, not as a battle, but as the best conversation of her life. The kid listened, utterly still. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So he wasn't trying to destroy you?" She laughed. "The opposite. He was trying to build me up, to see if I had something to say, and to give me the courage to say it. The real duel," she said, tapping her own chest, "is always in here, against your own fear, against the voice that tells you to play it safe and just fit." He challenged that voice, and he won. She saw the understanding dawn on his face. It wasn't a magic fix, but a seed planted, years piled on more years. She became a name that other young musicians knew. She made more records, led bigger bands, traveled the world. The business card in her old trumpet case grew soft at the edges, the ink a little faint. She never did call the number. She felt his presence in her music, in her teaching, in the way she approached every bandstand. So she never felt the need to dial. The connection was alive in the work. One evening, she was performing at a major jazz festival. The stage was huge, the crowd a vast, dark sea of thousands under the stars. It was the biggest audience of her life. In the middle of her set, as she introduced her band, she spotted a few young students in the front row, holding their instrument cases, their faces filled with that familiar mix of awe and longing. Her mind flashed back not to the duel itself this time, but to the moment just after, sitting at the bar with him, feeling the ground shift. She looked at those young faces and understood her role completely. She wasn't just playing a concert anymore. She was holding a door open. Before the next tune, she stepped to the microphone. "This next song," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the night air, "is about a conversation. It's about the moment someone asks you to speak up, and you find your voice." She didn't tell the whole story to the thousands. That was for smaller, quieter rooms. But she played the tune for the young woman she had been, and for the old master who had been so kind, and for the kids in the front row. She played it with all the story she had in her. When she traded solos with her saxophone player, they laughed, they pushed each other, they listened. It was a duel of the best kind. After the roaring applause faded and the lights came up, a small group of those students waited for her by the stage door. One of them, a young woman with a trumpet case, stammered a question about a specific chord change. She answered the technical question, then looked at the young woman. "The most important thing," she said, "is to play like you have something to say, because you do. Everyone does. Don't just play the notes. Tell me a story. The young woman nodded, a serious, determined look on her face. It was the same look, she realized, that she herself must have had walking into Wally's all those years ago. Walking to her car later, under the same moon that had shone on Boston, she felt the circle complete. The duel had changed everything because it had redefined what music was. It wasn't a trophy to be won, but a gift to be passed on. The challenge hadn't ended that night. It had just been handed to her, and now she was handing it off again, to the next player. And the next, the echo of that long-ago night wasn't just in her memory. It was in the sound of every student she encouraged, in every bandstand conversation she engaged in every note she played that sought not to impress, but to connect. The legendary musician had thrown a stone into a pond all those years ago, and the ripples were still spreading, touching shores he would never see. And she understood, with a deep, peaceful certainty, that this was how the music lived on, not in records or trophies, but in the courage to answer when you're called to the stage, to raise your horn, and to tell your story.